Good evening. It appears cash-in-transit heists are on the increase in the run-up to Christmas. But today, police managed to foil an attempt to rob a vehicle here in Gauteng.
This was the chilling discovery at the end of yet another cash-in-transit heist. Cans used for target practice minutes before the heist. A sign that the robbers were determined to kill. Even worse, this AK-47 was loaded with armor-piercing bullets known as cop killers, which can tear through a bulletproof vest.
The two occupants of the bakkie jumped out and took cover.
Over the weekend, the couple, a South African and his British friend, were hijacked at a viewing spot outside Sabc. After driving them around for over 14 hours, the four hijackers then repeatedly raped the British female. They then crashed the car near Barberton. They shot dead a motorist, Domingo Chambo, and wounded his companion when they stopped to offer assistance. The rape victim suffered lacerations to her wrists. Her friend was knifed in the leg and suffered wounds to his back. The incident took place 3 days after the provincial government announced that stringent measures would be implemented to ensure security and safety of tourists. Meanwhile, the British High Commission says it might review its travel advisory for British tourists. There was chaos in Johannesburg this afternoon after a runaway tanker burst into flames on the highway. The driver lost control in the rain and crashed into a barrier on a flyover at the Empire off-ramp near Wits University.
As firefighters fought the flames, eyewitnesses said it was a miracle no one was injured. It could have been so much worse. The driver lost it on a wet road and the tanker slammed into a barrier. The guard railing tore open the tank and 17,000 litres of fuel spilled out. As the flames took hold of the wreck, the fuel ran off the flyover. Luckily, most of the fuel ran harmlessly down the drains and off into a nearby river. The rush hour traffic backed up for kilometres around. The question tonight is how to avert the second disaster of the day by cleaning the fuel out of the river.
A TV cameraman in Los Angeles nearly became the victim of a story he was shooting when a high-speed car chase came to a dramatic end just meters from where he was filming. He was positioned to capture an image of an errant vehicle as it sped past. The chase came to an end right in front of him when the car clipped the side of a parked armored car before hurtling into a tree. Police arrived at the scene seconds later. The driver was arrested and taken to hospital. Well, it was a case of so near but oh so far for South African skipper Shaun Pollock on the fourth day of the second test against Sri Lanka in Centurion. Pollock was left stranded on 99 and denied his third test century when last best batsman Makhaya Ntini was dismissed. His team nevertheless managed a first innings lead of 125 runs. At stumps, the visitors were 180 for 3 with Kumar Sangakkara and Mahela Jayawadin putting up a rare guard action to help their side to a lead of 55.
Pollock looked well in control this morning, then disaster. His batting partner Ntini tried one ambitious shot too many, putting pay to Pollock's hopes of a century. The visitors, like in the first innings, got off to a solid start, but once again the openers failed to go on and make big scores. Jayawarden and Sangakkara, however, stood firm with a partnership of 119.
Yes.
With light fading, Sangakkara perished. Play was eventually called off, but the match looked set to end in a draw. Egbert Pusak, SABC.
Well, that's it from the English news team. Business Bit is up next. Have a good evening.
About talk of economic slowdown, the toys of the super rich just get bigger. Good evening and good to have you with us again. Despite meeting expectations, ABSA's share price closed lower today after it released its half-year results. ABSA believes the 15.2% rise in headline earnings per share are solid, considering the current challenging environment in the banking sector. Ross Lindstrom reports.
Part of the challenging environment ABSA finds itself in is due to the Reserve Bank raising lending rates by 400 basis points this year. ABSA expects conditions to remain tough until interest rates start to decline, hopefully in the second half of next year. The banking group has increased its provisions for bad debts by 21%, but it says it's not out of concern over prevailing conditions.
We believe that we need to be more conservative, and I think it's just to relook at your whole book and bringing provisioning forward, because you know that there's going to be impact on the interest rate. So where you are not certain about the impact of interest rates on some of your customers, we provided for that. So it's more caution than anything else.
Headline earnings for the 6 months rose by almost 16% to 1.5 billion rand, with growth supported by advances, deposits and personal banking. Fewer smaller banks meant consumers sought refuge with larger players. The group's cost-to-income ratio has come down slightly, but remains above the elusive 60% margin at around 62%. That's leaving the Unifer acquisition out of the equation, though. ABSA has still not closed the book on Unifer, with investigations ongoing. 4 senior managers have been dismissed so far, with 2 more awaiting the outcome of hearings. Ross Lindstrom, SABC, Johannesburg.
Results from IT solutions group Paracon have come in slightly lower than expected, but it's declared an unexpected maiden dividend of 2.5 cents a share. The group says it believes it has enough cash resources for this. In the year to September, headline earnings per share increased marginally off a lower revenue base. It says the performances of both its IT services and business solutions divisions were stable despite depressed market conditions. The group sold its stake in US group Mercury Technologies earlier this year. On the JSE, equities and futures ended firmer and bonds retraced in late trade. This as investors worried about tomorrow's release of CPIX numbers. Economists are predicting an uptick in inflation to over 12%. The 5 most active shares by value traded were Anglo, which closed more than 3% firmer, Goldfields closed more than 2.5% firmer, and Richemont closed 2.7% up. BHP Billiton advanced to 48 Rand and Anglo Gold firmed by 2 3/4%. The all-share index was up 1.5% at the close, while the gold index closed more than 2% clear. Resources firmed while platinum stocks rose 1%. Financials rose 1/3% and industrials closed more than 1% firmer. The information technology index closed 1% lower, and bonds retraced ahead of tomorrow's inflation figures. Still to come, fund managers expand products to reel in South Africa's notoriously bad savers. Stay tuned. Business Beat continues now. South Africans are notoriously bad at putting money away, with mainstream investments out of reach for most of them. But fund managers are widening their offerings in an attempt to rein in more savers.
Household savings fell to just 0.2% of gross domestic product last year, the lowest on record. One of the reasons is that 85% of taxpayers earn less than 12,500 Rand a month, leaving little room for savings after taxes. Bond repayments, medical aid and food have been subtracted. Fund managers are now getting more creative as they try to attract the bottom end of the market. Old Mutual says its new 4+ portfolio should meet the needs of 90% of the population, starting at just 150 Rand a month.
We believe that this product creates the essence to take savings back to the man in the street. We believe many of the savings vehicles that are currently available have either become unaffordable or in many cases don't produce any real return to the man in the street. And clearly, if you're getting no real return on your savings, then you might as well buy now and pay it off, especially if inflation is running at 6, 7 or 8% per annum.
Brian predicts that 4+ will draw heavy inflows. Under virtually all market conditions, the structure aims to limit any capital losses over 12 months to no more than 5%. André Skeppers, SABC, Johannesburg.
The South African Motor Vehicle Manufacturers Association says vehicle export profits have increased from 4 billion rand in the 1990s to 40 billion rand this year. America's African Growth and Opportunity Act is among the reasons cited for the boom.
The car industry is currently South Africa's third biggest contributor to GDP behind mining and agriculture. The sector employs an estimated 260,000 people. Under Washington's duty-free provisions of the African Growth and Opportunity Act, industry experts are projecting increased contributions toward the country's GDP. The automotive sector already accounts for 30% of the GDP, with 250,000 units already earmarked for the U.S. export market.
The opportunity is enormous, particularly on the component side, and I do believe on the export vehicle side. This year, around 120,000 cars, so not insubstantial, nothing in the mid-90s, so, we've come a long way from there. And I think over the next few years, maybe taking that up to around 250,000 cars.
The AGWA has begun to send good news to the small component manufacturers.
Aluminium wheel makers are now shipping not insubstantial amounts of wheels there, over 100 million for Nissan, for example, in terms of turnover for aluminium wheels. And a lot of the other smaller components are also heading towards North America. So companies like Doorbell, who are well known in the South African industry.
Meanwhile, BMW South Africa, one of the world's most successful automobile manufacturers, has begun to benefit from the AGWA scheme by more than doubling its exports to the United States. 3,000 people are already employed at the BMW SA plant in Roslyn outside Pretoria. Special U.S. left-hand driven vehicles worth 3.8 billion rand are manufactured.
It took us a year or two to penetrate the U.S. market, and we started exporting small numbers of cars to the United States. Well, those small numbers, a few thousand a year, have now, with AGOA, risen to this year around about 23,000 cars will go to the United States, valued at around about 3.8 billion rand.
Labor and trade unions are meanwhile still skeptical of opportunities rolled out by the Washington's duty-free scheme.
Exports don't necessarily create jobs, and if you look, for example, in the auto industry with the auto manufacturers, if you expand production massively, you can create jobs. But in a lot of cases, we've seen exports growing and jobs not being created. In fact, in many companies, jobs have been lost where exports have grown.
South African manufacturers first entering the global market arena, it can only be expected that the AGWA scheme will help fast-track this initiative. Mark Rasibite, SABC, Roslyn.
In the U.S., blue-chip stocks sagged on the back of declining AT&T numbers and tepid sales forecasts for retailer Walmart. On Wall Street, the Dow Jones was slightly lower, but the Nasdaq had firmed by 0.2%. London's FTSE closed 0.8% firmer. In Paris, the CAC closed more than 1.5% up, and Frankfurt's DAX was also higher. And looking at commodities, gold bullion was slightly firmer. Platinum is still above $600 an ounce, and Brent crude oil is at $23.91 a barrel. And on the currency markets, the rand had its best day in a year against the dollar today, trading at R9.53 earlier this morning. However, it settled back in late trade and was last trading at R9.59 to the dollar and at R9.64 to the euro. The rand is at R15.12 against the British pound. The euro lost ground slightly against the dollar, but is still above parity. The greenback is at 121.2 Japanese yen. And finally, there'll always be those that poo-poo talk of recession and economic slowdown. And in the realm of the super rich, where the size of your toy is everything, here's something that wins hands down.
Construction of the world's largest sailing boat, costing about £33 million, or some 500 million rand, is nearing completion in Britain. The 75-metre-long luxury yacht, complete with an onboard gym, jacuzzi and open-air cinema, is due for launch in May 2003. The owner is confident of finding plenty of recession-proof billionaires able to find the charter fee of $250,000 a week.
There are 490-odd billionaires in dollars in the world, and I only need 20 of them to get my 20 weeks charter.
The hull is longer than 9 double-decker buses. Her mast will stand nearly 100 metres high, holding the world's biggest sail. When she's launched in May, the Mirabella 5 will be the world's largest yacht, but probably not for long.
Couldn't hurt to have one of those. That's all we have time for tonight. Take care and do join us again tomorrow. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.